Good to be here with you, Ren. In opening, I wanted to ask you for the last time you can remember making yourself cringe and the last time you were proud of yourself.
Wow, that's a great starter question. All right, so cringe. The first thing that springs to mind is I used to work at RGA. I used to work with the great founder, Bob Greenberg, and Bob knows everybody. And one of the great honors of working with Bob was that I got to meet some of my design heroes, and one of which was Dieter Rams.
Wow.
And Bob was giving the opening speech for the premiere of Dieter Rams, the movie.
Okay.
And so he invited me and said, "Oh, you can come and meet Dieter." And I was like, "Fantastic." The only problem was that same day, my co-founder and friend Sunil was being enshrined into the Advertising Hall of Fame. And because it's advertising, it started at 11 a.m.
This is a big day.
I got quite drunk, let's just say it that way. And the premiere wasn't until much later in the day. And, I decided, as proof of how drunk I was, I got one of those Times Square rickshaws to the show.
That drunk. Okay.
I was very
That's
drunk.
the barometer of drunkenness.
And I can't drink as well, so I'm very lightweight. And anyway, long story short, I ended up was so determined to get a selfie. And I went down and was like, "Dieter, I want a selfie." And you'd have to look at my Instagram story because he's just giving me the death stare. It's like Dieter Rams hates me. I basically embarrassed myself in front of this legend. But it did actually work out okay in the end because we ended up doing an exhibition with Bob at the Cooper Hewitt, and he asked Dieter to get involved. And so I kind of ended up working with him a little bit tangentially, so it was all good in the end, but that was very cringy.
Wow. Yeah. Heroic cringe. Thank you for sharing.
That was, spectacular faceplant. And then the pride thing is a really good question. I was just thinking about it the other day because happy Pride. So
yes.
Pride Month.
Pride Month, yeah.
And I think, you know what? I think not just the last time I was proud, but maybe the first time I was ever proud of myself was when I came out as transgender 2 years ago on Transgender Day of Visibility. And I think the reason for that is because no matter what I'd achieved before that or done, it was almost like it wasn't me, it was someone else, because I wasn't living authentically as me.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't take any of those things seriously because I always had this voice in my head saying, if they knew the real you, if they knew you were transgender, then you might lose your family, you might lose your job, you might lose everything, which sounds dramatic, but sadly is the reality for many trans people out there. Thankfully, that was not the case for me. Because I have a lot of privilege that I'm very, grateful for and aware of. But when I came out, I actually said to Sunil, "You know what? I'm feeling proud." It was such a foreign feeling. And it's like, that might be actually the first time I'm proud of myself because it was the whole me doing something for the first time. And so fast forward 2 years now to Pride, I think, I was thinking about it this morning, I do think pride is the greatest gift that you could give to yourself and others, because it's based on self-acceptance. And you accepting yourself allows you to serve others better.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very, very good question, but there's some thoughts on that.
Well put. Love all that. I've been thinking about cringing and the role it plays in your life. And because when you look back on your life, invariably everybody will cringe at something. And in fact, like, what we were, say, 5 years ago, any one of us, versus what we are now, it's often that you look back and you're like, "Oh God, I wouldn't do that like that now." And that the same would be true in 5 years from now, right? You'll look back right now and I was figuring it out. I was trying to learn, and you hope that we're always in a state of evolution. I shared a podcast with an advisor and friend of mine, Indy Johar, and it was because I wanted him to hear how I was describing the role that brand can play in the world. But my own voice makes me cringe. And I said to him, excuse, I make myself cringe in this, but I'd love you to hear it anyway and hear your thoughts. And he speaks like this, but he responded, "I love cringing as a function of a learning organization." And I thought that was really powerful, because if you're not cringing, then you're probably not learning. You're not aware, and you're not in that state of awareness. So So I just want to recognize that cringing isn't a bad thing necessarily. But pride, if you're living your authentic self, I agree. It's a beautiful gift to the world. So thank you for the beautiful words.
Thank you.
So, Ren Rigby, formerly known as Mike Rigby, is an internationally acclaimed, multidisciplinary designer, educator, and activist based in New York City. They see design as a positive, transformational force that can drive business, shape culture, and improve lives. As founder and chief design officer of design and innovation company Proto, Ren is dedicated to advancing people. Much of their work and activism center around climate crisis, social justice, and specifically promoting equal rights for the transgender community. Ren, thank you for being with me today, friend. It's good to be here. I say friend because we've spoken a few times, and this is the first time we're meeting in person, but I do consider you already to be a friend.
Well, likewise.
In opening, I just wanted to reflect on why you're here. You're in the UK because you were speaking at the Birmingham Design Festival over the weekend, delivering a talk called Reinvention. I'd love to hear how that went.
It was a absolutely wonderful, magical experience. It really was. And, that was the first time I'd given a talk for 5 years and the first time ever as my true self, aka Ren. So it was a reintroduction of sorts, if you like. I was really happy to do my first talk as Ren at the Birmingham Design Festival, or Design Fest Brum, as they call it.
Yeah.
Because it's a really ego-free, wonderful, intimate kind of conference that the founders, Luke and Dan, put on for the community in Birmingham and beyond. It's a real labor of love, and they have a world-class roster of speakers. They don't make any money out of it. It takes them a year to put it on, and tickets are so low priced, oftentimes many of them are free. So to me, that just represents, I think, our industry at its best. Designers, creative people giving back to designers and creative people. And they represent what is a very long lineage of people doing that. So I just want to celebrate them and say thank you to them for what they've provided. And it was amazing. It was one of the most pivotal moments in my life, giving that talk.
Wow. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I mean, it was, so as you say, the talk was within the theme of process, which was the theme for the whole conference. And they asked me to speak about the process of reinvention. So it was really centered around the last 3 years or so, where I have transitioned. It was the story of how do you find yourself back when you get very dramatically lost. When the things that used to fuel you drain you, when you feel trapped by your own career, your own life, and you feel stuck and you don't know what to do. I got to the point where I was very ill. I had an infection. I severed the cranial nerve in my face. I couldn't speak. I couldn't close my eye. I was very seriously clinically depressed. And I didn't recognize my own thoughts. And so I wanted to talk about that in service of helping perhaps others who might be there or might be there in the future or might have been there in the past. And so I talked about the process of reinvention, and I started by breaking down the difference between change and transition. So change is situational. Something happens. Transition is psychological. So you get a new job. You have to leave the old job. You go from a student to a professional. And there's this transition phase in the middle of those things. It might be you move countries, as I have many times, from England to Australia to New York. And there's a huge transition phase in the middle of those things. And it works personally as well. You might lose a loved one. And to move on in life, you have to go through a transition. You have to let go. And in my case, going from Mike Rigby to Ren Rigby. And I think it's a scary place. It's full of cringe. But more than that, you don't know what you're doing. It's incredibly uncomfortable, and you can get trapped there, as I have, arguably for my entire life, in this transition zone. But what I was saying was, it can actually be turned to everyone's advantage because it's a forcing function for trying new things. It's a great space for innovation and ultimately a great place for reinvention. So I wanted to talk about how did I get through that transition? And it actually, for me, I asked myself 3 questions, which Matt Jones and David Hyatt shared. Very simple framework. What do you love? What is your skill? What does the world need?
Mm-hmm.
And so the skill one was pretty easy for me. It's design and communication. So writing, talking is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
But the what do you love thing was really hard because I'd fallen out of love with everything. I was living this kind of robotic life where my passions just felt like work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really feel anything. And I think that's what depression is. It's not feeling sad. It's a lack of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so to kind of rediscover and relearn what I loved, I went back to my childhood, looked back to young Michael Rigby, and I actually asked my mum, what was I into? I do firmly believe that we have an intuition around what we love as children. We don't need to be taught. We just are drawn to it. We just do it naturally, instinctively.
Mm.
And the things that I was into was art, like every kid, drawing, painting, especially designers. I loved nature. I loved plants and animals. But I had this obsession with mythology, ancient mythology. So I loved gods and titans. And it was this world that I just found so incredible and exciting. And rediscovering that with a conversation to my mum, it helped me to understand, you know what, I need to take a sabbatical to get well. And I need to go to the things that fuel me, that give me light and sunshine, give me energy.
Mm.
And so I dedicated the next, 6 months to getting well, to just being myself. I made that my only commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went down a really fascinating rabbit hole about plant medicine, ancient Egyptians, Hindu cultures, the fact that they have deep reverence for nature.
Mm.
They worshipped animals as gods. They had an incredible relationship with one plant in particular, which is the blue lotus.
Mm.
So if you look at Egyptian art, some of the greatest archaeological finds in Egyptian history, Tutankhamun, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So his sarcophagus was covered with blue lotuses. If you look at Hindu gods, they're often emerging out of blue lotuses. They have blue skin.
Mm.
What do we call meditation? The lotus pose. We don't actually know what the Egyptians called the lotus, so we use the ancient Greek term, which is nymphia cerulean. A bit of a mouthful. But if you shorten that down to nymph, it means water spirit.
Yeah.
So there's this connection between that plant and the afterlife or the spirit world or the gods, that led me to plant medicine and then eventually my own healing journey.
Wow. Beautiful. Where should we start with all that? Ancient Egypt. Let's go there. I mean, it's interesting to me that they were the first to use brand guidelines.
Arguably, graphic design peaked,
Yeah.
I would say, generally, yeah.
But maybe the seeds of materialism were being planted there. But you're right. It seemed that heaven and earth were closer then, and we don't fully understand exactly what was going on, do we?
Yeah, we don't. It's full of mystery, and I find that incredibly inspiring. But you're right, there was a deep connection between the sky and the earth, and they saw the Nile River as the Milky Way, and
Mm-hmm.
as above, so below. Of course, let's not forget the ancients had an intimate knowledge of the sky because they could see it. We are totally disconnected from the sky today.
Mm.
But for them, it would have been like looking at the entire universe at once. And it is full of mystery. We don't know how I would say graphic design peaked, architecture definitely peaked. There's the only ancient wonder of the world that's still left, of course. But they were also kind of deeply intimate around human physiology because of the mummification process. So they would remove parts of the body, actually most of the body, intestines, gut. They've removed the brain. And they kept the heart because they thought the heart was actually the center of intelligence and the soul.
Mm.
And so they would embalm the body and then... So they knew so many things, and I think that they knew something that we've forgotten, which is they were custodians of nature, not its exploiters.
Yeah.
And they had a deep reverence for nature.
Absolutely. And cats.
Yeah. Yeah, cats. They mummified the cats, didn't they? And
Yeah.
bulls, they would, yeah.
We've recently, in November, we got our first cat as a family. I've never owned a cat before, but the Egyptians believed they were portals to another dimension. And actually, when you sit with a cat in the room, I believe that to be the case. And I think some cats maybe are more powerful than others, but there's something about the presence of cats and those divine beings, as I sort of sense them to be, that they were tuned into. And there's a truth in a lot of this ancient wisdom that I think we need to rediscover. in the world if we're going to progress. And it feels like we need to rediscover in the context of where we are now, the advancement of technology, a kind of increased awareness of who and what we are in the world based on time that has passed, but not forgetting, as we have, so much of the wisdom that's already been created and learned over generations.
Yeah, and I think that is a shame. We're missing huge chapters of our own story, unfortunately. I mean, of course, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, it's estimated we lost 10,000 years of knowledge there, So we are relearning many things today. I mean, the closer you get to quantum physics, the more magical it sounds,
Yeah. And you wonder whether, in some respects, we do have access to all of that wisdom, even the stuff that's lost.
I know.
The kind of Jungian universal shared consciousness, but so many different ways of seeing that.
Yeah.
Like if you can kind of operate from a place other than your mind and kind of sense into an entangled universe, I think we've got access to a lot more than we realise a lot of the time.
I absolutely agree. I had first-hand experience of something like that quite recently as part of my recovery, which was, to work with plant medicine and ayahuasca in particular. And I got a first-hand experience of being tapped into something universal, ancient wisdom that's contained within these molecules. Nature really is amazing. Nature provides, of course, the foundations for all life. Plants are 400 million years old.
Yeah.
And I do believe that they can communicate with us. Of course, they communicate with each other. We know that through the mycelium networks. And it's just that their language is chemical. Our language is physical. We make strange mouth noises and we have body language. That's how we communicate. They communicate through chemistry. And I actually think that ayahuasca and DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, it actually opens up the avenues of communication just because it is chemistry. It's basically molecules that are designed to work perfectly with the human brain. And I think maybe it's opening up this channel between us and nature for them to help us just when we need it most.
Can you tell me more about the ayahuasca experience? Because it fascinates me. I haven't drunk ayahuasca, but I've been told, I have had various different moments where I've felt that I should and then resisted because it didn't feel right. And I've been told that it is not to be taken lightly. That if you are called by grandmother, is that right?
Mother Aya.
Mother Aya, then it's your time. But I'd be interested to know if that was the case for you and your experience of going through that and, so that others might learn, I suppose.
Yes. So to pick up where I left off with the Egyptians and the Blue Lotus. So I became obsessed with plant medicine and its relationship with the spirit world. I also was interested scientifically in the science of the brain because I didn't recognize my own thoughts. It was very scary. And so I became interested. I read a fantastic, iconic book called DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which is the first clinical scientific study of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the most powerful, potent hallucinogen we know of. And it was a clinical study of around 20, 30 people, and they injected the patient with DMT, and then they recorded what people saw. Everyone has a slightly different experience, but some of the commonalities were you leave your body, you're literally ejected from your body into the universe. You meet intelligent entities. Sometimes they have a bodily form, sometimes they do. Sometimes they look like deities, blue skin, snakes for arms, coming out of a lotus.
And is something called machine elves?
Yes,
is this right?
Yes,
this is a
machine
common
elves. Yes,
experience.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. The connection between elves and, in our England, gnomes.
Yeah.
So being associated with toadstools, that's because you get visions of gnomes and elves. So that's why in your garden, if you have a little cute gnome fishing off a toadstool, that's plant medicine.
Right.
Yeah, historically speaking. But So eventually, long story short, I discovered plant medicine through the Egyptians. Then I was really interested. I was called, to answer your question. Yes, I kept seeing and experiencing things, especially the jungle just kept appearing to me all the time. And then I did some research and I traveled to the Amazon jungle to work with the Shipibo Konibo people who are an indigenous tribe that have protected this plant medicine for thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, the habitat way of life and the plant medicine itself is now under threat. And so I think that there's a deliberate outreach here to help us with this powerful medicine when we need it most. So I went there. I learned from these ancient shamanic healers. So in the Shipibo tradition, there are two, a male and a female shaman. They dedicate their entire lives to healing others. They're born into it. So it's a lineage. And they live a really isolated life when they're not healing others. They're very secluded. And they are the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. They are pure, good people, you know. And I had the honor of participating in ayahuasca ceremonies, 4 of them, which is a lot. It was a lot. So the way it works is basically ayahuasca contains DMT. It's actually 2 plants that work together, which is a miracle because there are 165,000 plants in the Amazon. So the fact that we know how to put those 2 together is, one, an incredible folk chemistry, and I would argue some kind of miracle of probability. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it exists. They create a bitter black brew, and one of the plants contains DMT. The other contains a monooxidase inhibitor, which turns off the part of your gut that actually it makes it possible that you can digest DMT, which means you have a 4 or 5 hour experience versus injecting or smoking it, which is about 10 or 15 minutes. So you have this incredible journey, basically, that you go through. I should point out as a disclaimer that I'm not advocating anyone should take this. It's illegal for one thing in England and in America. It is legal in Peru because of its historical. It is a medicine. You know, it's not a narcotic. And if anyone is thinking of doing it, they should absolutely do their own research because it is very serious business. You know, you need to respect, prepare, and be ready. So yes, I had four visions, 4 experiences, which were, I would call it life-changing, but that would be to do it a disservice. You know, and it helped me tremendously, so much.
I'd love to hear about the visions. I'm wondering, just keep going, please. It's all fascinating.
Okay, so I did 4 ceremonies. I was told beforehand, I was given some advice, and I really took this seriously. So I was on a diet for 2 months. It's called La Dieta. So no meat, no salt, no sugar, no oil, no social media, no sex, no alcohol. And you basically eat a very whole food diet. And the idea there is that it removes all stimulants so that you get down to your base layer of consciousness. That means that the medicine can get to work on your trauma as opposed to physically removing those things from your body. So I would say, do the diet or you're going to be in a lot of trouble physically. And you'll get the most value out of the medicine by doing that. So I took it very seriously. I did so much research. I was given the advice to have an intent, not an expectation. So I had an intent of self-acceptance. I was struggling with my gender identity. I was burnt out. I was sick. And I had a lot of homophobia inside of me, and I wanted to confront that. Within that, someone told me it's useful to ask for what do you want to see. So I said, I want to see my pain, my shame, and my fear. Show me what I need to see. So I had 4 ceremonies. The first ceremony was pure love. I basically relived my entire childhood like it was a movie, but I was also in the movie. And it showed me all the love and kindness that people had shown me throughout my life, because during my depression, I'd been telling myself that my whole life had been sad, and it hadn't at all. It had been really happy. And I think that was the medicine giving me skin in the game and helping me remember love and the power of it. So I left that first ceremony feeling so much lighter and happier. And I knew that the ass kicking was coming. So that was the next ceremony. I got my ass absolutely kicked. So the ceremony takes place in a wooden temple called a maloka. You're sat in the jungle. It's open at all sides with mosquito nets. So you're sat in the jungle. It's complete darkness. So you drink the brew, the ayahuasca, at dusk. You wait 30 or so minutes until you hear this hauntingly beautiful sound, which is the sound of the shamans singing Icaros or prayers. And on the second ceremony, I drank more ayahuasca. And as soon as that sound started, I went to another plane of consciousness completely. I went to an ultraviolet pulsating jungle. I was lying on the floor and I couldn't move, and I had jeweled lizards running inside and outside of my body. And I met Mother Ayahuasca. This gigantic blue deity appeared in front of me and essentially went to work on my body. She was physically removing trauma from my body, and I was being manipulated like I was some kind of puppet, physically moved around. And so the way it worked was I'd feel a shooting pain, say, in my ankle, and then I would feel it being pulled up my calf until it hit my knee, and I would get a memory of childhood, a trauma that I'd forgotten about completely. And she would either show me a different side of that memory to help me process it and understand it, or she would just say, you don't need this anymore, and it would be physically removed from my body, and I would just, I would breathe it out. So it was like an exorcism, really. And if I have the memory still, but no pain associated with it. And that went on for many, many, many times. And yeah, I think it was incredibly profound. The second one was about my ego death. So in ayahuasca, you have what's called an ego death. So ego not being arrogance, ego being an imagined sense of self, the stories that we tell each other. And it helps you remove things that aren't serving you anymore. So in my case, I died 3 times. I was bitten to death by snakes. I had my ego pulled out of me like it was being ripped out of my bone marrow, and then it was smashed to pieces. And then I was buried alive. And it was terrifying. I've never been so scared in my life. It was truly terrifying. And there's no escape. You can't escape. So you face the darkest parts of you and your deepest traumas. And it brings them to the surface and helps you let go of them. And actually, I was thinking afterwards, perhaps that's what enlightenment is. It is about shining a light on those dark parts of yourself and understanding yourself as a whole person. So I realized after that second ceremony that I died 3 times because that was my shame, my pain, and my fear dying. And it was allowing me to move forward. That was the death of Mike Rigby, which allowed me to be reborn as Ren Rigby. My shame was in not coming out and having privilege and not serving my community, and that died as well. And my pain was loneliness, you know? And so it helped me to let go. And I had 2 other ceremonies, one of which was a spiritual awakening, which was mind-blowing. And then the 4th ceremony was helping me understand what next. And it went through every relationship in my whole life and helped me to understand, how can I help that person? How can that person help me? Who don't I need to worry about because someone else has got them? And I got so much of an incredible download of ancient knowledge. I remember everything. I remember all of it. 20 hours of direct conversation with some other entity. And I tried asking at one point, what are you? Who are you? What is this? And she said that we can't understand. It's beyond our ability to understand in this form. And we don't have to understand it. Don't worry about it. Just go with the flow, And she said, life is a classroom, not a courtroom. So you are here to create. You've chosen to be here. You're here to make things, beautiful things, make a better world, to go through challenges and come out of the other end of it, not to judge yourself or others. It's a classroom, not a courtroom. I don't know what is real, David. I've given up trying to understand what is real, what isn't. These were, of course, I was taking a powerful hallucinogen, but it was realer than this conversation right now is what I'd say. I was there. Wherever I was there. And, for that reason, I came back. I've got to tell you one experience. I went for self-acceptance. I was struggling with my gender identity. I was struggling to understand how I could move forward as Ren, as a business owner in our industry. I was worried that it would really impact my ability to keep people employed. And all kinds of other things. A lot of transphobia out there, let's be honest. I had a sequence where I heard a voice and it said, oh, well, you're a trained communicator, which is why I can speak to you so clearly. You have a job to go on to explain some of what you've seen today so that other people can start their own healing journey. She said, you were born with two spirits inside of you, male and female, and you should be proud because it's a special gift. And she pulled me outside of my body, which was still lying on the floor, and she lit up the left side of my body, which is, I found out afterwards, the feminine. And it was this beautiful park scene of gentleness and women working together, sisterhood, kindness, empathy, patience, love. And then she lit up the right side of my body, and it was the male side. And for me, it was like a desolate landscape, like almost Armageddon. I still don't fully know what that message was, but she did say to me that that men and me, are in a lot of pain because we're taught that they can't have any access to that femininity, to that gentleness and kindness. And they're in a lot of pain. So she said, just by you being yourself and living authentically, you are connecting both things together and expressing a different way to be male and a different way to be female. And it went on, and it was the most profound thing I've ever experienced. But the reason I wanted to say it is when I came back to my body, I felt in my body for the first time in my life. Both feet planted, you know? And I was feeling things, sensations in my body. I don't know where I was, but I think I only have had one foot in my own body. I know this sounds fantastical, unbelievable. And like I said, I've given up trying to even understand what is going on, what is real. But I do think there were some really powerful messages there that I wanted to share.
Thank you. Wow, Ren, you truly are a super communicator. That was beautiful. And what a journey. And thank you for sharing it. I find it fascinating that when we very first start to exist as fetuses, every fetus is female. It chooses that it will become male or remain female. So if we like the substrate or the foundational parts of ourselves are female, and I think you're right, when you go through kind of childhood, kids can be pretty cruel, let's be honest. Like, you know, there's all that to navigate. It's not easy, but there is a truth, I think, in our hearts and understanding of our world, which seems closer to source consciousness. I see it in my children all the time. And it feels a little bit like as you go through life, you sort of are required to put on this armor. I think you're right. In some respects, that might be more present in male or a man's life. I'm not fully sure, because I'm not fully sure if I buy into me being a man even. And people kind of have a problem with that in a way, because I'm not a huge fan of labels, to be honest, because we could say I'm a brother, a husband, a colleague, a friend, a man, but we could add another 50 labels to that and it wouldn't come close to what I truly am. And so I'm comfortable being a David. But I have noticed that David, in his younger years, as you say, there's this sort of truth. And I read a book called The Presence Process, and there's this pulled out statement about halfway through that says that adults are dead children. And that punched me in the gut. Like, that is so brutal, but in so many cases true. And it feels like the job of adulthood in some respects is to recognize the armor that you built up over the years and to start taking it off again, to be your truest self. And I believe that you have been through a divine experience and you're now here to share that with the world. I feel it just sitting with you, and I sense that's your role in life. And I think the closer we can all come to our role in life, like, the world would be such a better place. And that's not to say everyone would even have access to ayahuasca or should be going down that path. I think you can find it through different things, right? You can find it through love. You can find it through breath work, maybe meditation, all kinds of different paths, maybe to the same place. But ultimately, I think that's what anyone alive in these tipping point moments of humanity should be thinking about, their true and most authentic self. And it's stories like you like yours that will inspire us all. So I'm interested to know, for all of the creative community out there, and in fact every human that's listening to this conversation who may have lost faith themselves, because we all do at points, right? It's such a privilege to be a creator, to be a designer, to be, you know, somebody that works in the industry that we do. But I think we're all starting to lose faith because it's bound up in things that are just fundamentally flawed. capitalism being one you could point a big finger at, but actually there's so many things that drive our work that, kind of compromise the joy of creation and take us down the wrong path. So inevitably, I think most creators, if they're really paying attention and really give a fuck about what they're doing, probably lose faith at some point. So I'm really interested to know that part of what you've been through and how others might be able to learn from that in their own way. Like, what are the signs and what are your recommendations on how to figure out your own path forward?
Yeah, very well said. Yes, I agree. Going back to the point on children, I thought I was a girl when I was born, and for the young from 3 or 4 or 5, I identify with female leads in character stories, books, and I wore girls' clothes. And then, not by my family, but by other adults in my life, I was kind of shamed and told that that was not appropriate behavior for a little boy. And, I learned, perhaps incorrectly there, that to be accepted, I would need to hide that part of myself. And I've been hiding it ever since, until 2014, when I saw Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine, the first trans woman. And I was like, wow, that is my life they're talking about. Fast forward a few years later, I saw an amazing person called T. Uglo, who was the creative director of Google Sydney at the time. And seeing her on stage, a person from my own industry on stage, changed my life. Because I was like, wow, you can be an openly trans person, you can be yourself and be on a stage and still have a successful career. So I do think that authenticity and being yourself and being visible makes a huge difference and makes a better industry. So your point on you see yourself as David, I think that is a brilliant point, and that's why one of the reasons why I chose the name Ren. So Ren, R-E-N, it means a Chinese Confucius word that means human and humane. So yes. By choosing this name, I am bringing all the sides of me together in one authentic person for the first time.
Beautiful.
It also means, for me, it's short for an idea, a gender renaissance. So the Renaissance is one of my favorite periods in human history because it was, of course, very creative. But it was a time when antiquated established norms were challenged and people were fed up. People had had enough. The church was corrupt at the time. And they actually reignited. So Renaissance means rebirth. And society was fully reinvented and reborn in that moment. And it was partly triggered, believe it or not, by an obsession with the archaic. So it was actually ancient Greek. So, the Hermetica, the book of Hermetica with ancient wisdom and alchemy and all those kinds of things by Hermes Trismegistus. So Hermes Trismegistus was the Greek version of the Egyptian god Thoth. Okay. Thoth was the god of the secretary of the gods, and he was the god of wisdom, magic, and alchemy. He wrote a book called the Book of Thoth, one of the most influential books in all of history. It's recorded on the temple walls of Karnak. And when Alexandria conquered ancient Egypt and the Greeks took over, they were astounded by what they found in Egypt. And they adopted a lot of their gods and traditions. And the Renaissance period was the rediscovery of the Greek, which was a rewriting of the Egyptian. So it was this looking back to find our way forward. If you are lost, it's useful to retrace your steps. Go back to your childhood to remember what you love. Look back throughout history to see how we were more one with nature. We had a very different relationship. And society was reborn. What started in Italy then spread to England. We had the English Renaissance. Shakespeare, our most creatively fertile period in human history. And I love that because it proves that society can be reinvented fundamentally. And I also love that it was triggered by a respect for the past and a respect for nature. So that's been part of my journey. Ren also means renegade. So for me, just being alive and showing up every day of myself is an act of rebellion for those who choose to legislate against my right to exist. And I chose David Bowie as my hero. I love David Bowie, the king of reinvention, and I aspire to have 1% of the creative life that he had. And so when I launched on Transgender Visibility, my new chosen name, Ren, of course I'm a designer, so I had to create a logo. It was inspired by Rebel Rebel, which is a song all about gender fluidity, of course.
Yeah.
And I actually, it was my worst nightmare, but I had to go and shoot on a photo shoot to have a new image of myself. And I propped the costume, so my jumper and my trousers to match the logo, and then the lighting even matched the back shadow. So it was a nice kind of rebirth, if you like. I died 3 times. You've just been on that journey with me. And the death of Mike Rigby allowed me to be reborn as Ren. And something truly mind-blowing that happened while I was putting together that talk that I gave yesterday. I knew that Ren had a Japanese meaning because I've seen it in anime, used quite a lot. But up until that point, I hadn't looked it up. And you know what it means? Lotus.
Wow.
Lotus. My mind was blown. I was like, that's what happens when you ask the universe for help.
Wow.
You start to get all of these incredible synchronicities and coincidences. And I was like, how can it be lotus? I've just done a whole presentation about the Egyptian blue lotus, how that plant medicine guided me to this basically process of rebirth. And the name I chose means blue lotus. Mind blown.
Wow. So looking for synchronicities, it often feels, doesn't it, when you're in flow state and you're sort of feeling like you're on the right path, those kinds of synchronicities start to reveal themselves.
Yes,
and
I do
guide
believe that.
like the path forwards. And I think that's something to watch out for, because that is, like you said, you don't know what's real anymore, but we live in multi-dimensions of our mind, the physical world, but there's much more going on.
Absolutely.
And I think the quieter you can become and the more you can kind of tune into a wider spectrum of frequency or energy in your experience, I think there's guidance there.
Absolutely. And I think the more things that aren't serving you that you shed off, the more open you become to it. And so in my case, I'd built my entire life around Mike Rigby. You talked about armor a moment ago. So Mike Rigby was my armor. Don't get me wrong, Mike Rigby is part of me and always will be. It's all me, but that was the part of me that I'd built to protect myself as that kid that got rejected for my being myself, you know. And so, but it got to the point where it was so heavy I couldn't wear it anymore. And, you know, this journey that I've been on, this healing journey, allowed me to remove that. And when I removed it, obviously I felt lighter, so I could walk through the world easier. But these incredible synchronicities did start to happen. And I think that's because I've got so much more space. Now I've got nothing to hide. Now I don't have that shame, you know, or that pain or that fear as much. And I think that that's opened up the universe. One of the first things that I heard during my ayahuasca experience was, you've almost left this too late. And I've been calling you. And you need to get better at listening when the universe is speaking to you. Everyone you meet is for a reason. And get better at understanding why. And you can ask for help at any point, you know? So.
Wow. I think the role that, it's interesting that you were guided by shamans, and the role that they play in indigenous communities seems to be quite absent in modern society. You know, when I was growing up, we went to church every Sunday, and it was always a little bit performative. It didn't really feel like any of my family truly believed in what was being said or done in that church on a Sunday. But we went because it was routine, and I think it was probably ultimately quite good and healthy for my family to do that, because it was kind of chaos everywhere else. But that Sunday routine of going to church and having a meal together in the afternoon was very kind of grounding, I think. But I didn't look at the vicar and go, he is channeling wisdom. I didn't feel that he was going to, I don't know, sorry, vicar of, St. Mary's Church in Ross-on-Wye from, 1980s period. But shamans play a role in channeling those other dimensions, that other wisdom for the communities that they're there to serve. And this might be a stretch, but let's explore it anyway. I think what you've been through and will continue to go through opens you up as more of a channel to be able to help others, because you've been through that ego death, you've been through a connecting process, and that's what the world needs, channels of wisdom. And I sense it in people all the time.
Yeah.
But I sense the absence of it, the distractedness, the modern condition of society, which is disconnected. And in a world that's disconnecting from itself, I think we need to feel more. And it's painful. What you described of the ayahuasca experience does not sound fun, not for the faint-hearted. Not necessarily would you embrace an opportunity to do that, but actually versions of that we all need to go through if we're going to be able to help each other, I suppose, evolve. And the role of the designer, I think, increasingly does require us not just to be the conduit between a business and a consumer audience to sell more product. It's actually to use the joy of creation to widen out the conversation completely, widen the spectrum of communication. Think about what used to be known as brand as something other altogether. More of a kind of conversation between humans. Think of the potential of the work that we create if it's not just driven by capitalist consumption. What does the true joy of creation become if we all open ourselves up to being channels of something other and broader? And I think that it's tricky for me to say things like that in front of sometimes even our own team and certainly certain potential partners to accept and proceed, but it's what I truly believe. So what's your experience of working commercially versus what you've been exploring personally and where the two can meet?
Well, there is a very direct connection between what I've been searching for and what I do for a living, which is identity. So I would describe myself as an identity designer. So I help, I guess, companies, cultures, spaces, places, create a sense of identity. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I myself have been on this kind of like unpleasant obsession to find my best self. And so I find tremendous satisfaction in doing that for companies that I find meaningful. So I'm the founder of a company, as you mentioned at the intro, called Proto. And, our mission, if you like, is to advance people via the scale of meaningful organizations. So us finding and companies that we believe in and them finding us and then helping them succeed and grow and spread their influence, to me is really satisfying and important. And that's why I think it's really important that you do curate your portfolio very carefully, because doing a certain type of work, putting a certain type of work out, attracts more of that type of work. So to put it in other words, you reap what you sow. So I think it's really important to be mindful about that. I started my career, I wanted to work in art. I loved art, but I was also interested in nature. So climate action was something that I was just naturally drawn to. And I would just do small projects, side projects to try and have some work that I could put out there in that space so that hopefully people would find me. And that's happened in the most amazing way. So I'll give you a few favorite examples. So I was honored with an appearance on Debbie Millman's, iconic podcast, Design Matters. And it was a great conversation. And through that, I had people reach out to me. One of which was now a dear friend, an amazing person called Dr. Rebecca Altman. She's a PhD scientist and one of the leading thinkers and writers on plastics pollution. She would make a great guest on this. So let me just put that in there. And now she has an amazing story. So she wrote an incredible article on the history of plastics and behavior change. And she actually found archival footage from old conferences from the plastics industry and drew the line between the deliberate creation of a new behavior, which was disposability, that's now built into every product we know of. That was a new learned behavior. So the plastics industry, it was at a conference, and a plastics guy said, for us to drive sales, we need to teach people how to waste. We need to teach people how to use something, single-use plastics. Plastics could have taken a very different direction, but it didn't. It was deliberately designed around single use to drive sales. And guess how they did that? Through design and advertising. It was wide-scale, systematic change that the plastics industry created. I mean, the plastics industry designed the recycling logo. In fact, they didn't even pay for it. They crowdsourced it. A student did it. I mean, could they take the piss anymore? It's ridiculous. Anyway, sidetrack. So Rebecca is an amazing person, and she reached out to me. And through her, I actually got connected to her husband, who's also a PhD scientist, called Dr. Greg Altman, and his business partner, Beck, who's also a scientist. She's the chief operating officer, and he's the CEO of an incredible company that we rebranded, originally called Silk Inc., now called Evolved by Nature. And they've basically invented and patented a new molecule, which is an incredible green chemistry. And depending on how you stack the proteins, it can do incredible things. It comes from silk, natural silk, and it can replace the need for petrochemicals and microplastics in just about all manufacturing.
Wow. Because
you don't need to change the manufacturing process, which is often the excuse for not making progress. You just replace the harmful chemistry with this sustainable, green, biodiversible chemistry. And so let's just choose one industry, fashion, like the third most polluting industry that we know of. In 1 year, it produces more greenhouse gases than all maritime shipping and flights combined, for instance, and it's trending up. So anything that we are wearing now is finished with chemicals, harmful chemicals oftentimes, especially if it has a performance benefit, waterproofing, wicking, anti-pilling. It's all petrochemicals. And, many of which we don't even have health data on. And the ones we do, it's not good news. And so we don't even see or think about chemistry, but it's a huge issue that they've invented a solution to. It's literally a miracle. So it's the best thing I think I've ever been involved with in my life. To work with Greg, a true visionary, and Beck, and to understand the vision for creating basically a green biotech company. And we had an idea, which is typically, so biotech companies, Bayer, they have 1,000 brands, right? A brand for every category, a brand for every industry. Building brands is expensive. They certainly did not have the budget for that, and it's time consuming and it takes a lot of energy. So we thought, what if we can create one brand identity that evolves to suit different industries, so it can be really sophisticated for high fashion and really restrained for healthcare products and everything in between. And so we renamed them Evolved by Nature, fashion evolved by nature, manufacturing evolved by nature, clothing, whatever. So it's a phrasal name. And we designed the brand identity to evolve visually speaking through a coded typeface that's variable, that has serif on one hand that represented nature and super clean sans on the other that was science, the two parts of their business. Then we coded it algorithmically to respond to a stimulus, which was an asterisk. Wherever you put that asterisk, when you're writing anything in any word processor, it automatically evolves the typeface.
Yeah.
Labor of love, Ryan Atkinson, an amazing typographer called Matthew Rigby. We had to design 15 different typefaces and then figure out how they all come together. But we did that not because it was cool graphics. It is cool graphics, check it out. But we did that because we were trying to design one brand that could actually capture and create a movement across all industries. So all of the equity goes into that one brand. And together we are evolving things. So join the evolution became the call to action. And it's an incredible company. That technology is now in Chanel cashmere. It's now used in Nike leather to repair and to make that leather more sustainable so it can actually be reused afterwards, which is the problem with chemistry. It breaks the circular economy. Anyway, so that is a great example, I think, of a few things.
And was it a willing audience, like in terms of Evolved by Nature? Were they completely open to your ideas around?
So open to the point where, credit to Greg, who's a true visionary, because this was a startup out of MIT in Boston. And most startups don't have time for brand or money for brand, and it's not really a priority. It's like, let's just get to market, ship product, and we'll grow, quickly. Greg understood the power of branding, to your point. He understood that he could create a movement by having a powerful brand. But he also recognized that he didn't have that expertise. So he came to us and we really helped him he did have a bit of a struggle with the one brand idea until we showed it him. And then he was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. And it's going to be much more efficient than trying to manage 20 brands or whatever. And we also, together with Greg, created what we might call a go-to-market strategy. So it's kind of like, how does the model manifest? How does the business model manifest in a way to drive scale as quickly as possible? Not in a fiscal sense, but in the sense that the more people use this technology, literally the better it is for everyone.
Yeah.
So Sunil, my co-founder at Proto, he's an innovation strategist. So his expertise really is business and models. An amazing strategist called Alex Dempsey, and she and Sunil created a very simple go-to-market for them, which was designed to achieve maximum scale. So there's 3 parts to it. So the first part is a direct-to-consumer. Mm-hmm. So they make their own products. It's really good, hand cream and things like that, and they sell it directly to consumers. Then in the kind of middle, if you like, of the 3 is the partnerships. Mm-hmm. So that's what's called a second-party business model, where they partner with incredible fashion designers, Nike or Chanel or whatever. And then that's kind of a shared relationship where they help them bring products to market. Then there's the third part of the business model, which is B2B. So they sell bulk chemistry to manufacturers to replace the harmful agent with this sustainable, clean, green chemistry. Mm-hmm. So all 3 of those things are designed to work together because bulk chemistry drives revenue. So they can keep the lights on and grow and invest in more plants to build more and make more product. But those other 2, the first-party business model, it gives you and me a chance to participate in the movement by buying a product. Mm-hmm. And the collaboration leverages the brand equity that you see with Nike and Chanel so that we can actually grow desire and recognition for this brand, nice. Which then again drives sales. So it's a very simple go-to-market. So it's not just designing the brand, it's helping, how do we take this incredible invention, give it a sense of identity and cohesion, of course, but also help it to get to scale as quickly as possible, because that will help everyone.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work I'm very aware of, and an amazing organization. I suppose the challenge comes where organizations are less ready to evolve. Mm. And that's why I was kind of this idea of how do you evolve things that are not yet ready? Should you even try? I suppose is a big question. Mm. If designers are going to push things in the right direction, but they're feeling either trapped in a job or have already built up a portfolio of organizations that are less agreeable, in order to be able to think about the positive effects they can have in the world. Because I do find a lot of people are still trapped in business as usual. Huge percentage of the world is not ready to evolve yet, even though we are increasingly, seeing the unavoidable effects that we are having on the planet and the terminal nature of the modern state of things. Mm. But still, it feels like we are just in this sort of death march, keep going round in loops, going left. And in a way, the things that break that pattern, Bayo Akomolofe talks a lot about what he tries to do with his workshops and things is try and break people out of the death spiral. So there's a thing in nature with ants that's basically, have you heard of this, death spiral?
Yes.
They communicate with pheromones, and we don't really know why this happens, but sometimes like an army of ants will just start going in a circle until they die.
That's right,
And that's kind of what we're doing. So sometimes in opening a workshop, I heard an anecdote that he would say, I want you all to turn off your Zoom call and go outside and do something that if your neighbor sees you doing it, they would be concerned for you. And that is an attempt. So one person anecdotally said that they went out and hugged their cabbage patch because they just thought that was an interesting thing to do, and they've felt differently, towards their cabbage patch ever since. But these are the kinds of breaks in the pattern that we need to start having in society. Anything that can turn us right out of the death spiral is helpful, but a designer's role has to be a very brave one if they're going to try and break us out of the death spiral as organizations, if you're not yet willing to evolve. So, I mean, I suppose any advice for designers out there or people in the creative community that feel kind of trapped or like they're not able to either find their own way or the way on behalf of their organizations that are working through their work, any advice for them?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. So, a few thoughts. So first of all, I want to say that being able to choose what you work on is a huge privilege. Yeah. And many people don't have that. And, I just want to acknowledge that. Yeah. And I think maybe to bring us back to the beginning of the conversation where we started to understand the difference between change and transition. So climate change has happened. And what we're doing now is trying to transition. And I do think design has an essential role. One of the superpowers of design is that we make change visible. You can see it. And I think that has a very different effect on us. And let's just take it back to our craft, branding. Like when you're presenting a new future, a new vision for the world, we sometimes call them brand worlds, don't we? And you can see that change and you want to be a part of it. And that's tremendously helpful. So the power to visualize change. I think where you started that point, though, there has to be a will. When we started Proto, because we care a lot about words, we wrote definitions, and our definition of creativity is the will to bring imagination into reality. It takes will. Imagination isn't enough. Showing something visually is not enough. It helps, but it's not enough. It takes will and grit and resilience and determination to see that through into reality. And that's the only thing that counts. So much of our industry is caught up in that. And what counts is the thing that comes out, And it's not always possible. There's a million reasons why projects don't end up the way you wanted it to. But what I would say is that incremental progress is really important. And it's better than no progress. That's why we called evolved by nature, not revolution. It's going to take so much time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take empathy and understanding and encouragement from one another to make change, And so I don't know. I think hope is part of it. Will, resilience is a part of it. Being able to visualize things so that people can see it. It's the kind of see it to be it thing. It's back to the importance of visibility again. Make imagination real.
Nice. Beautiful. Thank you, Ren. Are there any reference points that you think the world should be exploring, like a powerful book or something that has influenced your life? Maybe a person that people should be aware of?
Well, I think the one that's top of mind. So I was honored to go to the Designing for Dignity Design Conference in Chicago with a dear friend of ours, Joe Roker and Jason Little, two amazing world-class designers. Actually, they're worth following, for a start. But we saw Tori Tunstall, and she was talking through 2 chapters of her pivotal book, Decolonizing Design. That would be a great place to start. But I do take a lot of hope at the amount of publications that are coming out over the last 2 or 3 years. There's quite a few on transgender, how to design for non-binary has just come out. There's a good one. So I think that would be my number one follow. I think Decolonize Design. Read that. Nice. She does an amazing. The thing that stuck in my mind is the Bauhaus is, of course, complicated. And I think there's many great things. I guess it's where user-centered design comes from. So it was founded to care for, the injured coming out of the war. And that's why the walls are white, was because they're post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was, how do you take a product and design it for a user need? So it was all about new practices. So how does the world capitalize on this explosion of new technology from the war? I mean, electricity was still pretty new at the time, And she makes the point that they chose Swiss design as the staple for Bauhaus because it was a neutral country during the war.
Right.
So I didn't know that. So it was aesthetically chosen before its neutrality, which then became the dominant aesthetic style of America. But she makes the point that the Bauhaus in its intent was good. The problem was we took it too literally, and it was literally designed for a middle-aged white man. And, we need to design a world for more people.
Absolutely.
So to me, that's a real invitation for innovation. How do you design for different communities, different body types, different cultures? And, I think the more we can do that, the better. Anyway, that was a sidetrack. But I would say read Decolonize Design.
Amazing.
It's great.
Top tip. Yeah, Joe Roker's setting up Accept and Proceed LA office at the moment. And actually, when I was first introduced to you, I reached out to her and said, do you know Ren? And she said, yes, Ren is my favorite person in design. And I'm assuming that was present company accepted, because it would have been a bit weird to say,
Hey,
Ren is my favorite person in design. No, sorry, my second favorite after you, David. That would just be weird, wouldn't it? So,
well, the feeling is mutual. I think back to what I was saying about Luke and Dan's being the best of design. I think Jo is that as well.
Yeah.
She really is. She's an incredible designer. And so is Jason. Together, they're doing some real good. And I do think that Jo plus Accept and Proceed is a wonderful combination. I can't wait to see that bear fruit.
Yeah. It's been amazing working with her. But that's a top tip in terms of the book. And I think that, I think it starts with us really paying attention and seeing each other, right? And actually starting to recognize that we're all wonders of the universe. Like, to be alive this far into the 21st century is incredible. And I suppose it depends on what you want to tune into. Like, I don't wake up feeling optimistic and positive every day, but I do things to try and take myself to that place, because I believe that is part of my role, to see the good in the world, to see the positive and opportunities that are present within the times that we're living in. And I think that that's kind of not easy for a lot of people a lot of the time, but I think that there is a lot of opportunity in these times. Like, we're living in this time where everything is evolving, as you say, and what a time to be alive because of it. Yeah. This incredible moment where everything could change, society could change, the way we relate to each other should change.
Well, I mean, we've seen it. We've talked today of two examples where society was dramatically reinvented. One was the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And the second one was the plastics industry did it. So if the plastics industry can do it, we can damn well do it.
We can damn well do it, yeah, for sure. Well, here's to the Renaissance. Is there anybody that you would like to dedicate this conversation to?
I'm going to dedicate it to my hero, my inspiration, and the person that I would not be here without, my mum. And I mean that literally. I wouldn't be here without her. But she's given me unconditional love and guided me and been there at every moment in my life. And I love her for it. She's an incredible woman. I learned so much from her, and I hope to do her proud.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ren's mum, and thank you, Ren.